The manager's voice cut across the store entrance like a blade. "You're done here, old man. Look at yourself. You can barely stand without shaking." Harold's weathered hands trembled against the shopping cart he steadied himself on, liver spots mapping decades across skin thin as paper. His fingers had shaken like this since 1944, since the morning a German artillery shell landed 10 feet away and killed 4 men, while leaving him merely damaged. But what this manager did not know, what no one in this Walmart knew, was that in exactly 14 minutes, a retired Army colonel would walk through those automatic doors. And when he saw what was hidden beneath Harold's faded blue vest, everything in this store would change. The morning had started the way every morning started. Harold Eugene Whitmore, 98 years old, had arrived 2 hours before his shift began. He parked his rusted pickup in the same spot he always parked, the one facing east, and he watched the sunrise the way he had watched every sunrise for 80 years. The colors spreading across the sky, the darkness giving way to light. The same colors he had seen from the deck of a transport ship crossing the English Channel on June 5, 1944, not knowing if he would live to see another dawn. The sunrise was his ritual, his penance, his prayer. Inside the store, Harold had walked the aisle slowly, organizing shelves that did not need organizing, greeting the overnight crew who knew him by name. He was not there for the work. His apartment had been too quiet since Margaret died. Here there were voices. Here there was purpose. Here an old man could hand stickers to children and feel, for just a moment, like he still mattered. Then Kyle arrived. Kyle Bressler was 34 years old, an MBA graduate who saw employees as efficiency metrics and stores as systems to be optimized. He had been manager for 8 months, and in those 8 months, he had made clear that Harold was a problem he intended to solve. "You were 20 minutes late returning from break." Kyle's voice was loud enough for customers to hear, theatrical in its authority. "Care to explain?" Harold's response came soft and steady. "I apologize, sir. My medication requires frequent restroom visits. I have a doctor's note on file." Kyle stepped closer, crowding the old man's space. "Maybe that's the point, Harold. Maybe when your body can't do the job anymore, it's time to admit it." A woman entering the store slowed, watching the confrontation. A stock clerk pretending to arrange displays nearby stopped pretending. Harold said nothing. He stood the way he always stood when addressed directly, heels together, shoulders square despite the curve age had carved into his spine. It was unconscious, muscle memory from a lifetime ago. The posture of a soldier. Kyle noticed and misread it as defiance. And that cap. He pointed at the faded veteran's cap on Harold's head. Corporate policy states headwear must display store branding. "Take it off." Harold's hand moved to touch the cap, fingers tracing the barely visible patch on the front. The 29th Infantry Division, blue and gray. The patch his mother had sewn there before he shipped overseas. The patch he had worn when he crawled through the bodies of his brothers on a beach that ran red with American blood. "I have worn this cap for 78 years, sir. It belonged to my unit." Kyle's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Your unit? What unit? The Early Bird Special Brigade?" He looked around, making sure others heard his joke. The woman who had slowed was now standing still, her face tight with disapproval. The stock clerk had set down his box and was watching openly. Harold's voice remained quiet. "The 29th Infantry Division, sir. We landed at Normandy." Kyle rolled his eyes. "Sure you did. And I'm General Patton." He leaned in close. "Here's how this works. The cap comes off by lunch, or you're terminated. That's not a request." He turned and walked away, satisfied with his performance. Harold stood motionless at the entrance. His hands trembled against the shopping cart. His heart pounded with a rhythm he had not felt in decades, the rhythm of battle, of survival, of rage contained. A soft voice broke through. "Mr. Harold?" He turned. Elena Vasquez, 23, stood beside him with a cup of coffee. Her eyes were wet. "I heard what he said. That was wrong." Harold took the coffee, nodded his thanks. "It's all right, sweetheart. Ive faced vers." She hesitated, then asked quietly, "Were you really there? At Normandy?" Harold was silent for a long moment. His gaze drifted somewhere far away, somewhere 80 years distant. Dog Green Sector, he finally said. Omaha Beach. June 6, 1944. I was 19 years old. Elena's breath caught. Harold looked down at his trembling hands. The boys who didn't make it, they were 19 too. Some were younger. My best friend was 18. He died before his boots touched sand. If you're watching this story from anywhere in the world, we would love to know where you're joining us from. Drop a comment below telling us your city or country. And if stories like this one, about courage and sacrifice and the heroes hidden among us, speak to you, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share more incredible, true stories that honor the forgotten warriors who walk among us every day. Now let us continue. Elena did not know what to say. She simply stood beside him, bearing witness. The automatic doors slid open. Customers streamed in and out. Harold straightened his vest, adjusted his cap, and began handing out stickers to children the way he did every morning. His smile was gentle. His voice was kind. Welcome to Walmart. Have a wonderful day. No one saw the war behind his eyes. No one knew that beneath the faded blue vest, sewn to his shirt where it had been sewn for 80 years, was a Ranger diamond patch. 2nd Ranger Battalion, Company C, the unit that had scaled the 100-foot cliffs of Point du Hoc under enemy fire. The unit that had destroyed the German guns threatening to massacre the invasion fleet. The unit of which only 90 men out of 225 were still standing after 2 days of fighting. No one knew that the gentle old man saying welcome to Walmart had once crawled 400 yards through the corpses of his brothers, through water red with their blood, to reach a seawall that most never reached. No one knew, but in exactly 11 minutes, someone would walk through those doors who would recognize the truth. Someone who had studied Point du Hoc for 30 years. Someone who would see the Ranger patch and understand exactly what it meant. And when that moment came, when the truth finally emerged, the man who had called Harold old man and mocked his service would learn a lesson that would bring him to his knees. Some lessons cannot be taught. They can only be witnessed. And this store was about to witness something none of them would ever forget. The morning of June 6, 1944, had begun with the same colors now spreading across the Walmart parking lot. Harold sat in his truck at 5 in the morning, 3 hours before his shift, watching the sky transform from black to purple to orange to gold. He did this every day, had done it every day since he came home from the war. The sunrise was the last beautiful thing he had seen before the ramp dropped and the world became hell. His hands shook against the steering wheel. They always shook. The doctors called it essential tremor, said it was common in men his age. Harold knew better. His hands had started shaking on a beach in France and never stopped. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a photograph. Margaret, his Maggie, taken on their wedding day in 1946, 1 year after he came home. She was smiling in the picture, that smile that had saved him, that had given him a reason to keep breathing when he could not remember why breathing mattered. 80 years today, Maggie, he whispered to the photograph. Can you believe that? 80 years since the beach. She had died 2 years ago, 71 years of marriage. And then one morning, she simply did not wake up. The doctor said it was peaceful. Harold was glad for that. She deserved peaceful. She had spent 7 decades loving a man whose nights were haunted by screaming and gunfire and the faces of boys who never grew old. He put the photograph away, touched the dog tags hanging beneath his shirt. 2 sets, his own and another pair. The second set belonged to Private First Class Thomas Riley. Robbie, his best friend, the boy who died before his boots touched sand. Harold closed his eyes, and he was 19 again. The English Channel had been rough that night. The transport ship rolled and pitched in waves that seemed designed to break men before the Germans had their chance. Harold had been so seasick he prayed for death. Robbie had held his head over the side and told jokes to keep him from giving up. You know what I'm going to do when we get home, Harry? Robbie had said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. I'm gonna marry Betty. Gonna buy a little house with a porch. Gonna sit on that porch every night and, thank God, I never have to get on a boat again. Harold had laughed despite the nausea, despite the fear. They had been boys. Just boys. Playing soldier until suddenly the game became real. The Higgins boat had carried 32 men toward Dog Green sector. Harold remembered every face. Remembered Sergeant Kowalski. They called him Dutch, the big Polish kid from Chicago who had lied about his age to enlist at 17. Remembered Private Ostrowski, Jimmy the Kid, who had just turned 18 and carried a picture of his baby sister everywhere he went. Remembered Private Hanrahan, Big Mike, who sang Irish songs when the fear got too heavy and made everyone laugh with his terrible accent. 32 men in that boat. 32 boys who thought they were ready for war. The ram dropped at 0630. Harold opened his eyes. The Walmart parking lot crystallized around him. The present. The now. 80 years away from that beach. But never far enough. He had been the fourth man off the ramp. Robbie was third. The machine gun fire started before Robbie's boots touched water. Harold saw the round hit his friend's helmet, saw the spray of red, saw Robbie fall forward into the surf and disappear beneath the waves. He did not stop. Stopping meant dying. He ran through water that reached his chest, through waves red with the blood of boys he had eaten breakfast with that morning. He ran, and he did not look back. The seawall was 400 yards away. Might as well have been 400 miles. Men fell all around him. The sand erupted with bullets. The noise was beyond noise, a physical force that pressed against his skull and tried to break him. He made it to the seawall, threw himself against the concrete, and looked back at the water. Bodies. Dozens of bodies. Floating. Drifting. The water was red from the surf line to the boats. Of the 32 men in his Higgins boat, 7 reached the seawall. Dutch was one of them. Jimmy the Kid was not. Big Mike was not. Robbie was not. Harold shook himself free of the memory. Checked his watch. Time to go inside. He walked through the automatic doors, past the shopping carts, past the registers that were just opening for the day. Elena was already at the customer service desk. She waved when she saw him. He waved back, grateful for the small kindness. The break room was empty at this hour. Harold poured himself coffee, sat at the worn table, and pulled out Robbie's photograph. A high school picture, black and white, faded with age. Robbie was smiling in the picture. He was always smiling. "I miss you, brother," Harold said to the photograph. Every single day. He had gone to see Robbie's mother in 1946, just like he promised. Sat in her living room in a small town in Pennsylvania and told her that her son was brave. That he did not cry. That he was the first one off that boat, and he never hesitated. She had given him this photograph. Asked him to keep it. Said she wanted someone who loved her boy to carry his memory. Harold had carried it for 78 years. The break room door opened. Elena entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She set one in front of Harold and sat across from him. "You always come in so early," she said. "Do you ever sleep?" Harold smiled faintly. "Sleep and I have not been friends for a long time, sweetheart." She hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Mr. Harold, what you said earlier. About Normandy. About your friend." Harold looked at her, saw the curiosity in her eyes, the compassion. "You want to know what it was like?" She nodded slowly. "My great-grandfather died there. Omaha Beach. I never got to meet him." Harold's breath caught. The coincidence, if it was coincidence, felt like something heavier. Something meant. What was his name? Ricardo Vasquez. Private First Class. Harold was silent for a long moment. The name moved through his memory like a stone dropped in water. Vasquez. Third wave. Dog Green sector. A face emerged from the depths of 80 years. His voice was barely a whisper. "I knew him." Elena's eyes went wide. "What?" "Your great-grandfather. I knew him. He helped me drag a wounded lieutenant to cover. He was brave, your great-grandfather. So brave." Elena's hand flew to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Harold reached across the table and took her hand. His trembling fingers wrapped around hers. "He died 20 minutes after we got that lieutenant to safety. Machine gun. He was trying to help another wounded man." Elena was crying openly now. "That is the kind of man he was, sweetheart. He did not die for a flag or a country. He died for the man next to him. That is what war really is. Not glory. Just trying to keep your brothers alive." The break room door opened again. Kyle stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand, eyes narrowing at the scene before him. "What's going on in here?" Harold slowly released Elena's hand. His eyes met Kyle's. Something cold moved behind the old man's gaze. Something that had crawled through bodies and climbed cliffs and survived what was never meant to be survived. "Nothing that concerns you," Harold said quietly. Kyle's jaw tightened. "That cat better be off by lunch." He turned and left. Harold looked back at Elena. "Squeeze her hand one more time." "Some men measure their worth by the power they hold over others," he said softly. "Some men measure their worth by the brothers they carried home." He stood slowly, bones aching, hands trembling. "Your great-grandfather was the second kind. And so, God help me, am I?" The morning rush hit like a wave. Customers streamed through the automatic doors, grabbing carts, checking phones, moving with the hurried purpose of people who had places to be. Harold stood at his post and greeted each one. "Welcome to Walmart. Have a wonderful day." His voice was gentle. His smile was warm. The children who took stickers from his trembling hands did not see the war behind his eyes. Elena watched him from the customer service desk. She had not stopped thinking about what he told her in the break room. Her great-grandfather, a man she had only known through a single photograph and a name etched on a memorial wall. Harold had known him, had fought beside him, had watched him die. She wiped her eyes and tried to focus on work. The other employees had noticed the morning's confrontation. Words spread in whispers through the aisles. "Did you hear what Kyle said to Harold? Called him old man. Told him to take off his veteran cap. Can you believe that?" Most of them said nothing publicly. Kyle was the manager. Kyle controlled schedules and hours and the small mercies that made minimum wage survivable. But the looks they gave Harold as they passed were different now. Softer, more respectful. Marcus, a stock clerk who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, stopped by Harold's station on his way to the back. "Hey, Mr. Harold." He kept his voice low. "I heard what happened. That was wrong, what Kyle did." Harold nodded slowly. "I appreciate that, son." Marcus hesitated. He glanced at Harold's cap, at the faded patch. "My grandfather was in Korea. He never talked about it either. But I know that look. The one you get sometimes. He had it too." Harold studied the young man's face. Saw the weight there. The shadows. "Where did you serve?" "Helmand Province. 2010 and 2012. Harold extended his trembling hand. Marcus took it. "Welcome home, brother," Harold said quietly. Marcus's eyes glistened. He nodded once, squeezed Harold's hand, and walked away quickly. The morning continued. Harold handed out stickers, greeted customers, smiled at children. The simple rhythms of a simple job, and yet it was everything to him. This was why he came. This was why he endured Kyle's contempt and his own aching body and the loneliness that waited for him in his empty apartment. These moments of connection, these small kindnesses, they kept him tethered to a world that had stopped making sense 80 years ago. Kyle returned at 10:30. He approached Harold's station with the assistant manager Patricia trailing behind him. Patricia was young, nervous, clearly uncomfortable with what was about to happen. She kept her eyes on the floor. Kyle held up his clipboard like a weapon. "I have been reviewing your performance metrics, Harold." He spoke loudly, ensuring nearby customers could hear. "You have sat down 4 times this morning. Store policy requires greeters to remain standing during their shifts." Harold's voice was calm. "I have a medical accommodation on file, sir. My doctor recommended periodic rest for my legs." Kyle waved dismissively. "Accommodations can be reviewed. And frankly, if you cannot perform the basic functions of the job, maybe this is not the right position for you." A woman with a shopping cart had stopped nearby, watching. An older man in a Vietnam veteran cap stood frozen by the display of shopping baskets. A young mother pulled her child closer, her expression tight with disapproval. Kyle did not notice, or did not care. He stepped closer to Harold, invading his space. "And I notice the cap is still on your head." Harold said nothing. His hands trembled against the cart he leaned on for support. "I gave you a direct instruction this morning." Kyle's voice dripped with condescension. "Are you having trouble understanding? Should I speak slower?" The Vietnam veteran took a step forward. His voice was gravelly. "Hey, you need to back off that man." Kyle turned, irritated. "Excuse me? This is an employee matter. I do not care what it is. That man is wearing a 29th Infantry patch. Do you have any idea what that means? Kyle's smile was thin and patronizing. It means he bought a hat at a surplus store. Now if you will excuse us. He turned back to Harold, reached out, flicked the cap with his finger the way he had done that morning. The cap shifted, nearly fell, and Harold moved. His hand shot up and caught the cap with reflexes that should have been impossible for a man his age. For just a moment, a single heartbeat, something changed in his bearing. The stoop disappeared. The trembling stopped. His eyes went cold and flat. The eyes of a predator, the eyes of a man who had killed and would kill again if necessary. Kyle saw it. His smirk vanished. He took an involuntary step backward, some animal instinct screaming at him to retreat. The moment passed. Harold replaced his cap carefully. His hands resumed their trembling. The gentle old man returned. But everyone who had seen it knew. Something else lived inside Harold Eugene Whitmore. Something forged in fire and blood. Something that age had dimmed, but not destroyed. Please do not touch my cap again, sir. Harold's voice was soft, polite, utterly without fear. Kyle tried to recover his composure. His voice cracked slightly. The cap comes off by lunch. That is final. He turned and walked away quickly, Patricia hurrying after him. The Vietnam veteran approached Harold, extended his hand. 1st Cavalry Division, 1969 to 1971. It is an honor, brother. Harold shook his hand. 29th Infantry, then Rangers. Normandy. The veteran's eyes went wide. Normandy? D-Day? Harold nodded once. The veteran stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he straightened to attention and saluted. Harold returned the salute. His form was perfect despite the tremors. Muscle memory that 8 decades could not erase. The veteran lowered his hand. His voice was thick. There are not many of you left. No, Harold said quietly. Not many at all. The veteran nodded slowly. Then he turned and walked into the store, but not before casting a look back at Harold that held something close to reverence. The young mother who had been watching approached. She was crying. I do not know what you did, she said. But thank you. Thank you for your service. Harold smiled gently. Thank you for raising the next generation, ma'am. That is service too. She laughed through her tears, squeezed his arm, and moved on. Harold turned back to his station, adjusted his cap, straightened his vest. Beneath the vest, sewn to his shirt where it had been sewn for 80 years, the Ranger diamond patch pressed against his chest. 2nd Battalion, Compagnie C. Pointe du Hoc. The men who climbed the impossible cliffs. The men who destroyed the guns. The men who held the line when holding the line meant dying. The automatic doors slid open. A man in his 60s walked through. Polo shirt. Khakis. Nothing remarkable about him at first glance. But Harold's eyes tracked to his belt buckle. Army insignia. His posture. Ramrod straight. Career. Military. His gaze. Sharp. Assessing. The gaze of a man who had commanded other men in combat. The man paused just inside the doors. His eyes swept the entrance, taking in the scene with practiced efficiency. They passed over Harold, then snapped back. Something in his expression sharpened. He stared at Harold's cap, at the 29th Infantry patch, at the way the old man stood despite his age and his tremors. Harold felt the weight of that gaze, recognized it for what it was. One soldier seeing another. The man did not move, did not speak, just stood there, watching, his brow furrowed with the beginning of a question that would change everything. The cliffs had been 100 feet of sheer rock face. Harold remembered looking up at them from the landing craft, salt spray stinging his eyes, and thinking that no man could climb that. No man was meant to climb that. The Germans knew it too. That was why they had put their guns there. That was why they had fortified the position and filled it with soldiers who could rain death down on the invasion beaches. Pointe du Hoc was supposed to be impregnable. The Rangers climbed it anyway. Harold stood at his greeter's station, handing a sticker to a little girl with pigtails, but his mind was 60 miles west of Omaha Beach, 80 years in the past. The cliffs, the ropes, the Germans shooting down at them as they climbed. Dutch had been 10 feet above him on the rope when the grenade came down. Sergeant William Kowalski. They called him Dutch because of his Polish last name, A joke that made no sense, but stuck anyway. He was 20 years old, a kid from Chicago who had lied about his age to enlist at 17. He was the best soldier Harold had ever known, the bravest man he had ever met. The grenade bounced off the cliff face. Dutch saw it before Harold did. He let go of the rope with one hand, grabbed Harold by the collar, and shoved him sideways into a crevice in the rock. The explosion took Dutch instead. Harold could still hear the sound, could still feel the heat, could still see Dutch's body falling, tumbling down the cliff face, disappearing into the chaos below. "Keep climbing, farm boy." Those had been Dutch's last words, shouted over the roar of gunfire just seconds before the grenade. Do not stop for nothing. Harold had not stopped. He climbed, hand over hand, boots scraping against rock, bullets snapping past his head. He climbed because Dutch told him to climb. He climbed because stopping meant dying. He climbed because somewhere below him, Robbie was already dead, and somewhere above him, there were guns that needed to be destroyed. 90 men reached the top. Out of 225 who started the climb, they found the gun emplacements empty. The Germans had moved the artillery inland, anticipating the assault. For one terrible moment, Harold thought it had all been for nothing. All that death, all that sacrifice, for empty concrete bunkers. But Colonel Rudder sent patrols inland, and Harold was on the patrol that found the guns. 5 massive artillery pieces, hidden in an orchard a mile from the cliffs, capable of raining shells down on Omaha Beach and Utah Beach alike, capable of destroying the entire invasion fleet. They destroyed every one of them. Thermite grenades shoved into the barrels. The guns would never fire. Rudder sent a runner back with a message. "Look at that point du lac." Mission accomplished. Guns destroyed. That message saved thousands of lives. Maybe tens of thousands. The guns that were supposed to massacre the invasion force never fired a single round. And all it cost was 135 Rangers, dead or wounded, left on the cliffs and in the fields and in the bunkers they had taken. Dutch, Jimmy the Kid, Big Mike, so many others. Boys who would never grow old. Boys whose names Harold still carried, recited like a prayer every morning, a roll call of the dead that he would never stop calling. "Mr. Harold?" The voice pulled him back. Elena stood beside him, her expression concerned. "You're somewhere else," she said softly. "Far away." Harold blinked. The Walmart materialized around him. The fluorescent lights, the shopping carts, the cheerful overhead, music playing something he did not recognize. "I was remembering," he said quietly. "Sometimes the past feels more real than the present." Elena nodded. She did not push. She had learned, in the hours since he told her about her great-grandfather, that Harold's memories were sacred ground. "You did not trespass without invitation. Can I ask you something?" Her voice was hesitant. Harold looked at her, this young woman who carried the blood of man he had fought beside. "Ask. You said my great-grandfather helped you drag a wounded lieutenant to cover. What happened to the lieutenant?" Harold was silent for a moment. The memory surfaced slowly, like a body rising from deep water. His name was Patterson, Lieutenant James Patterson. He took a round through the thigh. The femoral artery was nicked. He was bleeding out. Harold's hands trembled harder. "Your great-grandfather and we pulled him behind a tank trap. I put pressure on the wound while your great-grandfather went for a medic. The medic never came. Too many wounded. Not enough medics." He paused. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I held that wound closed for 45 minutes. Talked to Patterson the whole time. Told him about the farm where I grew up. Told him about the girl I was going to marry when I got home. Told him anything I could think of to keep him awake." Elena's eyes were wet. "Did he make it?" Harold nodded slowly. "He made it. Lost a leg, but he made it. He went home to his wife in Ohio. Had 3 kids. Lived until 1998. He looked at Elena. "Your great-grandfather saved that man's life. If he had not helped me drag Patterson to cover, Patterson would have bled out on that beach. 3 children, 7 grandchildren, 11 great-grandchildren. All of them exist because Ricardo Vasquez ran into gunfire to help a stranger." Elena was crying openly now. She did not try to hide it. Harold reached into his pocket, pulled out a worn piece of paper, folded and refolded so many times the creases had become permanent. Patterson's daughter sent me this 20 years ago, after her father died. She found my name in his papers. He had written about that day, about the 2 soldiers who saved him. He unfolded the paper carefully, handed it to Elena. It was a letter, handwritten. The ink faded but still legible. "Dear Mr. Whitmore," it began. "My father spoke of you often in his final years. He said you held his wound closed for 45 minutes while bullets flew overhead. He said you talked to him about your farm and your sweetheart and kept him alive when he wanted to give up. He also spoke of another soldier, a young man named Vasquez, who helped drag him to safety and then went back out to help others. My father said that man was the bravest person he ever saw. I thought you should know that because of you and Mr. Vasquez, my father lived. He saw his children grow up. He held his grandchildren. He had 54 more years of life. There are no words to thank you for that, but I wanted to try." Elena's hands shook as she held the letter. Tears dropped onto the paper. "Keep it," Harold said gently. "It belongs to you now. It belongs to his family." Elena looked up at him, overwhelmed. "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything, sweetheart. Just remember him. That is all any of us want. To be remembered." The automatic doors slid open. Harold glanced up. The man in the polo shirt was still there, still watching. He had not moved from his spot near the entrance. His eyes were fixed on Harold with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. Harold met his gaze, held it. Something passed between them. Recognition, not of faces but of kind. One soldier seeing another across the gulf of years and wars. The man started walking toward him. Harold's heart began to pound. His hands trembled violently. He knew what was coming. He had seen that look before, on the faces of men who recognized what he was, who understood what the patches and the scars and the bearing meant. The man stopped 3 feet away. His voice was quiet but carried. "Son, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." Harold nodded slowly. The man's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "What beach?" Harold's trembling hands went still. For the first time in 80 years, they stopped shaking. "Dog Green," he said. "Omaha." The color drained from the man's face. His next word came out broken. "What unit?" Harold reached up slowly, pulled open his Walmart vest, revealed the Ranger diamond patch beneath, faded but unmistakable, sewn to his shirt where it had been sewn since 1944. "2nd Ranger Battalion," Harold said quietly. "Compagnie C. Point d'Oeil." The man's knees buckled. The man caught himself before he hit the floor. His hand shot out and gripped a shopping cart, knuckles white, steadying himself against the weight of what he had just heard. His face had gone pale. His breath came in short, sharp gasps. Harold watched him with quiet understanding. He had seen this reaction before. Not often, but enough times to recognize it. The shock of encountering living history. The overwhelming realization that the men from the books and the documentaries and the faded photographs were real. We're still here. We're standing in a Walmart in a faded blue vest, handing out stickers to children. The man straightened slowly. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. "My name is James Westbrook. Colonel, United States Army, retired. 32 years of service." Harold nodded. "I can see it in you, son. The way you carry yourself." Westbrook's eyes were wet. He did not try to hide it. "I have studied Pointe du Hoc for 30 years. Taught at West Point. Wrote a book about it. The Rangers who scaled those cliffs are legends. They are in every military history course in every academy in the country." He paused. His voice cracked. "And you're telling me you were one of them?" Harold's response was simple. "I was there." Westbrook stared at him. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the store, a child laughed. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary day, surrounding a moment that was anything but ordinary. "Do you understand what Pointe du Hoc was?" Westbrook's voice was barely controlled. 225 Rangers climbed a 100-foot cliff under enemy fire. They had been told the guns at the top could destroy the entire invasion fleet. They climbed knowing most of them would die, and they did it anyway. Harold said nothing. He did not need to. He had lived it. Westbrook continued, his words tumbling out like a confession. Only 90 were still standing after 2 days of fighting. 90 out of 225. They held that position against counterattacks for 2 days with no reinforcement, no resupply, almost no ammunition. They held it because the mission demanded it. They held it because Rangers do not quit. His voice broke completely. And you're standing in a Walmart, in a greeter's vest, and that manager was telling you to take off your cap. Harold looked at him steadily. The cap is not the point, son. Then what is? Harold was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. The point is that we did not climb those cliffs for recognition. We did not hold that position for medals or parades. We did it because it needed to be done, because the men next to us needed us to do it, because giving up was not an option. He touched his cap gently. This cap carries the names of every man who did not come home. Robbie, Dutch, Jimmy the Kid, Big Mike, 61 others from my company alone. I wear it for them, not for me. Westbrook wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He took a shaky breath. Sir, with your permission, I would like to verify your service. Not because I doubt you, but because what you are telling me, if it is true, the world needs to know. Harold shook his head slowly. The world does not need to know anything. I'm just an old man trying to be useful while I still can. With respect, sir, that is not your decision to make. Westbrook's voice firmed. History belongs to all of us. And if you are who you say you are, then you're a living piece of that history. One of the last pieces. He pulled out his phone. I'm going to make a call. A friend at the National Archives. He can pull your service record in minutes. Will you allow that? Harold hesitated. He had spent 80 years avoiding this. Avoiding the questions and the attention and the well-meaning people who wanted to turn his worst memories into stories. Margaret had understood. She had protected him from it, deflected the questions, kept his past private. But Margaret was gone. And this man, this colonel who had devoted his life to studying what Harold had lived, was looking at him with tears in his eyes. All right, Harold said quietly. Make your call. Westbrook stepped away, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low and urgent, but Harold caught fragments. Point Duc. Company C. Still alive. I need verification now. Elena had been watching from the customer service desk. She approached slowly, her face a mixture of awe and confusion. Mr. Harold, what is happening? Harold sighed. The past is catching up with me, sweetheart. It always does eventually. A small crowd had begun to gather. Employees who had noticed the strange interaction. Customers who had stopped to watch. The Vietnam veteran from earlier had returned, standing at the edge of the group with his arms crossed, watching protectively. Westbrook returned, phone still in hand. His face was transformed. Harold Eugene Whitmore. His voice carried across the entrance. Private First Class, 2nd Ranger Battalion, Company C. Enlisted March 1943. Trained at Camp Forest, Tennessee. Deployed to England, April 1944. He looked up from his phone, meeting Harold's eyes. Landed at Point du Hoc, 0710 hours, June 6, 1944. Participated in the destruction of German artillery positions. Held defensive position for 48 hours against enemy counterattacks. The crowd had gone silent. Westbrook's voice trembled as he continued reading. Awarded the Bronze Star for valor. Awarded the Purple Heart for wounds received in combat. Commendation from Colonel James Rudder himself for, and I quote, extraordinary courage under fire and unwavering dedication to the mission. He lowered his phone. Sir, you're not just a Point du Hoc veteran. You are a decorated hero of one of the most famous military actions in American history. Harold's hands trembled. His voice was barely audible. I'm not a hero. The heroes are buried in France. Westbrook shook his head. He walked forward slowly, stopped directly in front of Harold. Then, with the precision of 32 years of military service, he snapped to attention and rendered a perfect salute. Sir, he said, voice cracking, it is the honor of my life to meet you. The Vietnam veteran stepped forward, straightened to attention, saluted. Marcus, the Afghanistan veteran who worked in the stockroom, pushed through the crowd. Tears streamed down his face. He saluted. One by one, the veterans in the store came forward. An older woman who had served as an Army nurse in Desert Storm. A young man with a Marine Corps tattoo on his forearm. a middle-aged father who still wore his Navy anchor belt buckle. They formed a line. They saluted. Harold looked at them, overwhelmed. His hands shook. His eyes filled with tears he had not shed in decades. At the back of the crowd, drawn by the commotion, Kyle Bressler stood frozen. His clipboard hung limp at his side. His face had gone white. He was beginning to understand just how badly he had miscalculated. And the reckoning was only beginning. The salutes held. 5 veterans standing at attention in the entrance of a Walmart, honoring a man in a faded blue vest whose hands would not stop shaking. The moment stretched, suspended in time, while customers stopped and stared and tried to understand what they were witnessing. Harold raised his own hand slowly. The tremors made it difficult, but he managed. His salute was textbook perfect, the muscle memory of 80 years guiding his arm into position. He held it for 3 seconds, then lowered his hand. At ease, he said quietly, "Please, this is not necessary." Westbrook lowered his salute, but did not relax his bearing. "With respect, sir, it is absolutely necessary. You earned this recognition decades ago. The fact that you never sought it makes it more important, not less." The crowd had grown. Word was spreading through the store in whispers and text messages. The greeter at the front. He was at D-Day. He climbed those cliffs in Normandy. Employees abandoned their posts to see. Customers gathered with their phones out, recording everything. Harold felt the weight of all those eyes. It pressed against him, suffocating. He had spent 80 years avoiding this exact moment, hiding in plain sight. A quiet old man with a simple job, invisible to a world that had moved on from the war that shaped him. Now the invisibility was gone, and he did not know how to exist without it. Elena appeared at his side. She took his trembling hand and squeezed it gently. "It is okay, Mr. Harold," she whispered. "You do not have to say anything. Just breathe." Harold looked at her, this young woman who carried the blood of a man who had died beside him. Her presence steadied him in a way he could not explain. He took a breath, then another. Westbrook stepped closer, his voice low enough that only Harold and Elena could hear. "Sir, I need you to understand something. There are only a handful of Point du Hoc veterans still alive. Fewer than 10 in the entire world. Your living history, your testimony, your memories, they are irreplaceable." Harold shook his head. "My memories are nightmares, son. They are not something to celebrate. They are something to preserve," Westbrook countered gently. "Not for celebration, for understanding, so that future generations know what was sacrificed for them." Before Harold could respond, a voice cut through the crowd. "What is going on here?" Kyle pushed his way to the front, his face flushed with anger and something else. Fear, perhaps. The fear of a man watching his carefully constructed authority crumble. "This is a place of business, not a veterans convention. Everyone needs to return to their stations or their shopping." No one moved. Kyle's voice rose. "I said move. Now." Westbrook turned slowly. He was not a physically imposing man, but something in his bearing made Kyle take an involuntary step backward. "Do you know who this man is?" Westbrook's voice was calm, controlled, dangerous. Kyle swallowed. "He is an employee. My employee, and he has been disrupting store operations all morning." Westbrook smiled. It was not a kind smile. "This man," he said, "is a veteran of the 2nd Ranger Battalion. He scaled the cliffs of Point du Hoc on D-Day. He destroyed German artillery that would have killed thousands of American soldiers on the invasion beaches. He received the Bronze Star for valor and a personal commendation from Colonel James Rutter, one of the most legendary commanders in American military history." He took a step toward Kyle. "And you have spent the morning mocking him, demanding he remove his veteran's cap, threatening his job, calling him old man." Kyle's face went white. "I did not know. You did not ask." Westbrook's voice hardened. "You saw an old man in a greeter's vest, and you assumed he was nothing. You judged him by his appearance instead of his character. And now you're going to stand there and tell me this is about store operations?" Kyle opened his mouth to respond. Nothing came out. The crowd watched in silence. Phones recorded every moment. The shift in power was palpable, almost physical. The manager who had wielded his authority like a club was shrinking before their eyes. Harold spoke. His voice was quiet but carried. Colonel, that is enough. Westbrook turned, surprised. Harold met his eyes. This young man made a mistake. A bad one. But I have made mistakes too. We all have. Tearing him apart in public will not undo what he did. It will only create more pain. He looked at Kyle. The manager could not meet his eyes. I do not need an apology, Harold continued. I do not need recognition. I came to work this morning to hand out stickers and say hello to people. That is all I wanted. To be useful. To matter, even in a small way. His voice dropped. The men I served with, the men who died on those cliffs and on that beach, they did not die for medals or parades. They died for the man next to them. They died so their friends could live. That is what sacrifice looks like. Not anger, not revenge, just love. The silence that followed was complete. Even the overhead music seemed to fade. Harold turned to Kyle. You wanted me to take off my cap. You said it violated corporate policy. Kyle flinched but said nothing. Harold reached up slowly. His trembling fingers touched the brim of the faded cap. The cap his mother had sewn the patch onto. The cap he had worn for 78 years. The cap that carried the names of 65 dead brothers. He removed it. The crowd gasped. Beneath the cap, Harold's thin white hair was matted with sweat. But that was not what drew their attention. On his scalp, barely visible beneath the wisps of hair, was a scar. A long, jagged line that ran from his temple to the back of his head. The kind of scar that comes from shrapnel. The kind of scar that should have killed him. Harold held the cap in his trembling hands. He looked at it for a long moment. My mother sewed this patch the night before I shipped out, he said softly. She died while I was overseas. I never got to say goodbye. This cap is the last thing I have that she touched. He looked up at Kyle. You asked me to take it off. So I'm taking it off. Not because you demanded it, but because I want you to see something. He turned the cap over, pointed to the inside of the brim. Names were written there. Dozens of names. Faded, but legible. Written in different hands, different inks, accumulated over decades. These are my brothers, Harold said. The men who did not come home. I write their names here, so they are always with me. So I never forget. His voice broke. Robbie Riley. Dutch Kowalski. Jimmy Ostrowski. Mike Hanrahan. Ricardo Vasquez. He looked at Elena when he said her great-grandfather's name. She was crying silently. 65 names, Harold whispered. 65 boys who never grew old. I carry them everywhere I go. He placed the cap back on his head slowly, adjusted it carefully. So no, son, I will not be removing my cap. Not for corporate policy. Not for anyone. He met Kyle's eyes. But I forgive you for asking. Kyle stood frozen. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came. The clipboard slipped from his fingers and clattered against the tile floor. The sound echoed in the silence like a gunshot. Harold watched him. There was no anger in the old man's eyes. No triumph. Only a weary understanding that came from 98 years of watching people make mistakes and learning that vengeance healed nothing. The crowd remained still. Phones still recorded. But something had shifted. This was no longer a confrontation. It was a confession. A reckoning. A moment of grace offered to someone who had not earned it. Kyle's voice came out broken. I did not know. I swear I did not know. Harold nodded slowly. I believe you. How can you forgive me? Kyle's eyes were wet now. His corporate mask shattered completely. After what I said, after how I treated you. Harold was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 8 decades. Son, I watched my best friend die before his boots touched sand. I held men in my arms while they bled out and begged for their mothers. I climbed a cliff with bullets snapping past my head and grenades falling around me. I have seen cruelty you cannot imagine. Real cruelty. The kind that haunts you forever. He paused. What you did was not cruelty. It was ignorance. And ignorance can be fixed. Kyle's knees buckled. He did not catch himself this time. He sank to the floor, right there in the entrance of the store he managed, and he wept. The crowd watched in stunned silence. No one moved to help him. No one mocked him. They simply witnessed, understanding that some moments were too sacred to interrupt. Harold looked down at the broken young man. Then, slowly, painfully, he lowered himself to one knee. His joints screamed in protest. His hand shook violently. But he managed it. He placed a trembling hand on Kyle's shoulder. "Listen to me, son." Harold's voice was gentle now, almost fatherly. "You made a mistake. A bad one. But a mistake is not who you are. It is what you did. And what you do next matters more than what you did before." Kyle looked up, tears streaming down his face. "What do I do?" Harold smiled faintly. "You learn. You grow. You treat people better. Not because they might be war heroes, but because everyone you meet is carrying something. Everyone has a story. Everyone deserves dignity." He squeezed Kyle's shoulder. "I spent 80 years carrying guilt for things that were not my fault. Do not make the same mistake. Forgive yourself. Then be better." Westbrook stepped forward and helped Harold rise. The old man's legs trembled with the effort of standing, but he refused to show weakness. He straightened his vest, adjusted his cap, became the greeter again. "Now," Harold said quietly, "I believe I have stickers to hand out." A laugh rippled through the crowd. Not mocking, relieved. The tension that had gripped the store for the past hour began to release. Westbrook shook his head in amazement. "Sir, you're something else. I'm just a man's son, same as anyone." "No." Westbrook's voice was firm. "You are not. But I understand why you need to believe that." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "I am on my way to a memorial dedication 2 towns over. Veterans event. But I want to stay in touch. If you ever want to talk, if you ever want to share your story, please call me. Anytime." Harold took the card, looked at it for a long moment. "I have never wanted to share my story," he said quietly. "The memories are too heavy." Westbrook nodded. "I understand. But, sir, there are fewer than 10 of you left. Men who were there. Men who remember. When you are gone, and I pray that day is far away, the first-hand knowledge goes with you. The world will only have books and films. Not voices. Not truth." Harold slipped the card into his pocket. He did not promise anything, but he did not refuse either. The crowd began to disperse slowly. Customers returned to their shopping, though many cast glances back at Harold as they went. Employees drifted back to their stations, whispering among themselves. Elena remained. She had not moved from Harold's side through the entire ordeal. "Mr. Harold," she said softly, "are you okay?" Harold considered the question. It was not a simple one. "I do not know," he admitted. "I have spent my whole life hiding from this. Hiding from the attention, the questions, the way people look at you when they find out." He touched his cap. "Margaret understood. She protected me from it. Let me be invisible." His voice caught. "But Margaret is gone, and maybe being invisible is not what I need anymore." Elena took his hand. "Whatever you need, I am here. We all are." Harold looked at her, at this young woman who had become something like a granddaughter to him in the space of a single morning, at the letter in her pocket, connecting her to a great-grandfather she had never known, at the thread of history that bound them together across 80 years. "Your great-grandfather would be proud of you," he said softly. "You have his heart." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She hugged him then, carefully, mindful of his fragile frame. Harold stiffened for a moment, unaccustomed to physical affection. Then he relaxed into it, let himself be held. It was the first embrace he had received since Margaret died. When they separated, Harold wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "All right," he said, his voice steadier now. "Enough of this. There are customers coming through those doors, and someone needs to welcome them." He turned back to his station, picked up his stack of stickers, straightened his spine as much as his aged body would allow. The automatic doors slid open. A mother entered with 2 small children, a boy and a girl, both under 10, eyes wide with the wonder of a world still full of possibility. Harold smiled at them, a real smile, the smile of a man who had walked through hell and somehow found his way back to the light. "Welcome to Walmart," he said gently. "Would you like a sticker?" The little girl nodded shyly. Harold peeled a sticker from the sheet and handed it to her. She beamed at him. "Thank you, mister. You are very welcome, sweetheart." He watched them walk away, the children chattering excitedly about their stickers. Such a small thing, such an ordinary moment, and yet it meant everything. This was why he came to work every day. This was why he endured the aching joints and the trembling hands and the memories that never faded. These moments of connection, these small kindnesses, They were what the dead had died for. Not glory, not flags, just the ordinary miracle of children smiling and families shopping and life continuing. Harold touched the names written inside his cap. "Still here, brothers," he whispered. "Still trying to make it count." The afternoon sun slanted through the store windows, casting long shadows across the tile floor. Harold had been at his station for 9 hours now, longer than his usual shift, but he could not bring himself to leave. Something had changed. The air felt different. He felt different. Word had spread beyond the store. The videos recorded that morning had found their way onto the internet. Someone had posted the moment Westbrook read Harold's service record aloud. Someone else had captured Harold removing his cap and revealing the names written inside. The clips were being shared, commented on, watched by thousands. Harold knew none of this. He did not own a computer or a smartphone. His world was small by design, contained within the walls of his apartment and this store and the cemetery where Margaret lay beside an empty plot waiting for him. But the world was coming to find him whether he wanted it or not. The first reporter arrived at 3 in the afternoon, a young woman with a camera crew, asking for the veteran greeter. Store employees directed her to the entrance, where Harold stood handing out stickers to a family with 3 children. "Mr. Whitmore?" The reporter's voice was eager, hungry for the story. "I am with Channel 7 News. Could we have a few minutes of your time?" Harold looked at her, at the camera, at the microphone thrust toward his face. "No, thank you, ma'am," he said politely. "I am working." The reporter pressed forward. "Sir, your story is inspiring millions of people. The videos have been viewed over 2 million times in the past 4 hours. People want to know more about you." Harold's hands trembled harder. He did not want this, had never wanted this. The attention felt like a weight pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. Elena appeared at his side. She positioned herself between Harold and the camera. He said no, she said firmly. "Please respect that." The reporter hesitated, then backed off. But she did not leave. She and her crew retreated to the parking lot, waiting. More reporters arrived over the next hour. Local news, national news, a man who said he was from a veterans organization, a woman who claimed to represent a documentary film company. They gathered outside the store like vultures circling, waiting for Harold to emerge. Inside, the store had become a sanctuary. Employees took turns checking on Harold, bringing him water, making sure he was okay. Customers who recognized him from the videos approached with quiet respect, thanking him for his service, asking for nothing more than a handshake. Kyle had not been seen since the morning. Patricia, the assistant manager, had taken over operations. She approached Harold late in the afternoon, her expression apologetic. "Mr. Whitmore, there are a lot of people outside asking for you. Corporate has called 3 times. They want to know how to handle this." Harold sighed. He suddenly felt every one of his 98 years. "I do not know how to handle it either, sweetheart." Patricia hesitated. "There's a back exit, employee entrance. If you want to leave without being seen, I can arrange it." Harold considered this. The easy escape, the return to invisibility. It would be so simple to slip out the back, drive home to his empty apartment, and pretend none of this had happened. But something stopped him. Westbrook's words echoed in his mind. "There are fewer than 10 of you left. When you are gone, the first-hand knowledge goes with you." He thought about Robbie, about Dutch, about all 65 names written inside his cap. They had not run from their duty. They had not hidden when the moment demanded courage. They had climbed a cliff that was supposed to be unclimbable and held a position that was supposed to be unholdable. And here he was, afraid of cameras and questions. "No," Harold said quietly. "I will not sneak out the back." Patricia looked surprised. "Are you sure?" Harold nodded slowly. "I have been hiding for 80 years. Maybe it's time to stop." He removed his Walmart vest and folded it carefully, placed it on the greeter's stand. Then he straightened his cap, squared his shoulders, and walked toward the front doors. Elena caught up with him. "Mr. Harold, you do not have to do this." He looked at her and smiled. A sad smile. A brave smile. "Yes, I do, sweetheart. I owe it to them." She did not ask who he meant. She already knew. The automatic doors slid open. The late afternoon sunlight hit Harold's face, warm and golden. He paused for a moment, letting his eyes adjust. The parking lot had transformed. Beyond the reporters and their cameras, a crowd had gathered. Hundreds of people. Some held American flags. Others held signs with messages of thanks and support. A group of veterans in motorcycle jackets stood at attention near the entrance. Harold stared at them all, overwhelmed. A reporter rushed forward, microphone extended. "Mr. Whitmore, can you tell us about your experience at Pointe du Hoc?" Another shouted over her. "How does it feel to be called a hero?" A third pushed closer. "What message do you have for young people today?" The questions blurred together, a wall of noise that pressed against Harold from all sides. His hands shook. His heart pounded. For a moment, he was back on that beach, drowning in chaos, unable to think or move or breathe. Then a voice cut through. "Stand down. All of you. Now." The reporters fell silent. The crowd parted. Colonel James Westbrook strode through the gap, still in his polo shirt and khakis, but carrying himself like he was in full dress uniform. He had not left after all. He had been waiting. He positioned himself beside Harold, put a steadying hand on the old man's shoulder. "Mr. Whitmore will speak when he is ready," Westbrook announced. "Until then, you will give him space and you will show respect." This man stormed the beaches of Normandy, so you could have the freedom to stand here with your cameras and your questions. The least you can do is let him breathe. The reporters backed away, chastened. Harold looked at Westbrook. "Thank you, son." Westbrook shook his head. "Do not thank me, sir. I should be thanking you. Every day for the rest of my life." Harold turned back to the crowd. All those faces, all those eyes, waiting for him to say something meaningful, something worthy of the moment. He thought about what he wanted to say, what he needed to say. The words formed slowly, rising from somewhere deep inside him. "I am not a hero," he began, his voice quiet but steady. "The heroes are buried in France, in a cemetery overlooking the beach where they died. 9,387 of them. Boys who never grew old. Boys who gave everything so that the rest of us could live." He paused, touched his cap. "I have carried their names for 80 years. I have whispered them every morning like a prayer. And I have spent every day since that beach trying to be worthy of their sacrifice." His voice grew stronger. "You want to know what message I have for young people? Here it is. Be brave, not fearless. Brave. Fear is human. Courage is what you do when you are afraid. And kindness, real kindness, costs nothing but means everything." He looked out at the crowd. The men I served with, they were not fighting for flags or glory. They were fighting for each other, for the man next to them, for the chance to go home and live ordinary lives. His eyes glistened. So live your ordinary lives. Hug your children. Call your parents. Be kind to strangers. That is how you honor the dead. Not with parades or speeches. With love. With decency. With remembering that every person you meet is carrying something heavy. He straightened his spine one final time. "That is all I have to say. Thank you for listening." The silence held for a heartbeat. Then the applause began. The applause rolled over Harold like a wave. It came from everywhere at once. From reporters who had lowered their microphones. From a crowd that had gathered in the parking lot. From the veterans in their motorcycle jackets who stood with tears streaming down weathered faces. From the employees who had followed Harold outside and now watched from the store entrance. He did not know how to receive it. For 80 years he had avoided this exact moment, and now that it was here he felt unmoored, lost, like a ship without anchor in a storm of gratitude he had never sought. Westbrook steadied him, kept a hand on his shoulder, grounded him in the present. "Breathe, sir," Westbrook said quietly. "Just breathe." Harold breathed, in and out, the way he had breathed on that beach when the world was ending around him. The way he had breathed on those cliffs when every handhold might be his last. The way he had breathed through 80 years of nightmares and memories and the crushing weight of survival. The applause faded slowly. The crowd waited, sensing that something more was coming, that this moment was not yet complete. A man pushed through the front of the gathering. He was old, though not as old as Harold. Mid-80s perhaps. He walked with a cane, but his back was straight. His eyes were fixed on Harold with an intensity that seemed to burn. He stopped 10 feet away. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Are you Harold Whitmore? Company C, 2nd Rangers?" Harold nodded slowly. "I am." The man's cane clattered to the ground. He did not seem to notice. His hand was shaking as badly as Harold's. "My name is David Patterson," the man said. "My father was Lieutenant James Patterson, 29th Infantry Division." Harold's breath caught in his throat. The world seemed to tilt beneath him. "You held his leg together for 45 minutes, David continued, tears flowing freely now. "You and another soldier dragged him to cover when everyone else was pinned down. You talked to him about your farm and your sweetheart, and you kept him alive when he wanted to give up." Harold could not speak. His voice had abandoned him. David took a step closer. "My father lived because of you. He came home. He married my mother. He had 3 children, 7 grandchildren, 11 great-grandchildren." His voice broke completely. "I exist because of you, Mr. Whitmore. My children exist because of you. 22 people in this world owe their lives to what you did on that beach." Harold's knees buckled. Westbrook caught him, held him upright. "I have your father's letter," Harold whispered. "His daughter sent it to me. I gave it to someone today. Someone whose great-grandfather was the other soldier. The one who helped me drag your father to safety." David's eyes went wide. "Ricardo Vasquez?" Harold nodded. David let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "My father spoke of him constantly. Said he was the bravest man he ever saw. Said he went back out into the fire to help others and never came back. He died 20 minutes after we got your father to cover," Harold said quietly. "Machine gun. He was trying to save another wounded man." David wiped his eyes. "Do you know where he is buried?" "Normandy. Cala Valigermere. Plot F, row 28, grave 14. David stared at him. "You remember the exact location?" "I remember all of them," Harold said. "Every man from my unit who is buried there. I have never forgotten a single one." The crowd had gone completely silent. Even the reporters had stopped recording, too moved to remember their jobs. David stepped forward and embraced Harold. It was not a gentle embrace. It was the embrace of a man clinging to living history, to the thread that connected him to a father who had died 26 years ago, to a moment on a beach that had rippled forward through generations. "Thank you," David whispered. "Thank you for my father. Thank you for my life." Harold held him. His arms were weak, but he held on with everything he had. "Your father was a good man," Harold said softly. "He fought hard to stay alive. He wanted to come home to his family. I just helped him do that." They separated slowly. David retrieved his cane, wiped his face, tried to compose himself. "I came as soon as I saw the video," he said. "Drove 4 hours. I had to meet you. Had to thank you in person." Harold shook his head. "You do not owe me thanks, son. I did what anyone would have done." "No." David's voice was firm. "Not anyone. You. You did it. And I am grateful every single day." Elena pushed through the crowd. She had been watching from the edge, tears streaming down her face. In her hand, she clutched the letter Harold had given her that morning. "Mr. Patterson?" Her voice trembled. "My name is Elena Vasquez. Ricardo Vasquez was my great-grandfather." David turned to her. His face transformed. "You are his family?" Elena nodded. She held out the letter. "Mr. Harold gave me this today. Your father wrote about what happened. About my great-grandfather." David took the letter with shaking hands. "Read it slowly." When he looked up, his eyes were bright with tears. "My father always said there were 2 angels on that beach," he said quietly. 2 soldiers who appeared out of nowhere and saved his life. He said he spent 50 years trying to find them. He died without ever knowing their names. He looked at Harold, then at Elena. "And here you both are, standing in front of me, 80 years later." He laughed through his tears. A broken, joyful sound. "My father would have called this a miracle." Harold shook his head slowly. "Not a miracle, son. Just time. Time has a way of bringing things together, of completing circles we never knew were open." He looked at Elena, at David, at the crowd that had gathered to witness this impossible reunion. "Your father and your great-grandfather," Harold said softly. "They're the reason any of us are standing here. Their courage, their sacrifice, We are all just living in the world they made possible. David reached out and took Elena's hand, squeezed it gently. Thank you, he said to her, for carrying his memory, for being here. Elena squeezed back. Thank you for telling me about him. I only knew a name and a photograph. Now I know he was a hero. He was, David said. They both were. He turned back to Harold. All three of them were. Harold said nothing. He touched his cap, felt the names written inside pressing against his fingers. Robbie, Dutch, Jimmy, Mike, Ricardo, James Patterson, who had lived because two strangers refused to let him die. The circle was closing. The threads were weaving together. And somewhere, Harold felt certain, the dead were watching, smiling, finally understood. The sun was setting by the time the crowd began to thin. Orange and pink streaked across the sky, the same colors Harold watched every morning, the same colors he had seen from the deck of a transport ship 80 years ago. The world kept turning. The sun kept rising and setting. And somehow, against all odds, Harold was still here to witness it. Westbrook had arranged for a quiet space inside the store. A meeting room in the back where Harold could rest, away from the cameras and the questions and the weight of so many eyes. Elena sat beside him. David Patterson had pulled up a chair across the table. The three of them sat in silence for a long moment, bound together by threads of history none of them had known existed until today. Finally, David spoke. Mr. Whitmore, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Harold nodded. Go ahead, son. David leaned forward. The anniversary is in 2 weeks. June 6th, the 80th anniversary of D-Day. There are events planned in Normandy. Memorials. Tributes. The French government is hosting a ceremony at Pointe du Hoc. He paused. They are looking for survivors to attend. Men who were actually there. But there's so few left. Most of the ones who could travel have already committed. They need more voices. More witnesses. Harold's hands began to tremble harder. He knew where this was going. David continued gently. Would you consider going back? To Normandy? To the cemetery where my father's savior is buried? Where all your brothers are buried? The question hung in the air like smoke. Harold closed his eyes. Behind his lids, he saw the cliffs, the beach, the bodies floating in red water. He saw Dutch falling, saw Robbie disappearing beneath the waves, saw 65 faces frozen forever at 18, 19, 20 years old. He had promised them. On the day he left France, standing at the edge of the cemetery that was still being dug, he had promised he would come back, that he would tell them how it ended, that he would not forget. 80 years, and he had never kept that promise. I cannot, Harold whispered. I'm not strong enough. Elena took his hand. Mr. Harold, you are the strongest person I have ever met. Harold shook his head. You do not understand, sweetheart. I have spent 80 years running from that place, from those memories. If I go back, if I stand on that beach again, I do not know if I will survive it. David's voice was gentle. My father almost did not survive that beach either. But he did, because of you. And he spent the rest of his life being grateful for every single day. He reached across the table and placed his hand over Harold's trembling fingers. You gave him 54 more years. 54 years of sunrises and family dinners and watching his children grow. You gave him the chance to meet his grandchildren, to hold his great-grandchildren. His voice cracked. He never got to thank you. He searched for years, but he never found you. He died without ever knowing your name. David squeezed Harold's hand. Go back to Normandy, Mr. Whitmore. Stand on that beach one more time. Visit the graves of the men you loved. And let the world see that the boys who stormed those cliffs were real. That they mattered. That they should never be forgotten. Harold was silent for a long time. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the store, the closing announcements began to play. He thought about Margaret, about what she would say if she were here. She had always protected him from the spotlight, but she had also always believed in him. Believed that he was stronger than he knew. Believed that someday he would find the courage to face what he had buried. Maybe that day was today. I made them a promise, Harold said quietly. The day I left, I stood at the edge of that cemetery, and I promised I would come back. That I would tell them how it ended. He looked up. His eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. I never kept that promise. I was too afraid, too broken. I told myself I would go next year, and then the year after, and then the years turned into decades, and the decades turned into a lifetime. He straightened in his chair. I'm 98 years old. I do not have many years left. Maybe not many months. If I'm going to keep my promise, it has to be now. Elena's breath caught. Mr. Harold, are you saying yes? Harold nodded slowly. I am saying yes. I will go back to Normandy. I will stand on that beach. I will visit their graves. He touched his cap. I will tell them how it ended. David let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. Thank you, sir. Thank you. But Harold held up a trembling hand. I have conditions. Name them. Harold looked at Elena. I want her to come with me. Her great-grandfather is buried there. She deserves to visit his grave. Elena's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, unable to speak. Harold turned to David. And I want you there too. Your father spent 50 years searching for the men who saved him. You can stand at Ricardo's grave and thank him on your father's behalf. David wiped his eyes. It will be my honor, sir. Harold leaned back in his chair. The weight that had pressed against his chest for 80 years felt lighter somehow. Not gone, but lighter. Bearable. One more thing, he said quietly. Anything. Harold's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I want to find Robbie. I want to stand at his grave and tell him I'm sorry. Sorry I could not save him. Sorry I've carried the guilt for so long. Sorry it took me 80 years to come back. His voice broke. He was 18 years old. He was going to marry his high school sweetheart. He never even made it off the boat. Elena squeezed his hand. We will find him, Mr. Harold. We will stand with you. Harold nodded, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Then it is settled. I'm going back to Normandy. He looked toward the window, toward the last light of the setting sun. I'm going home. The word surprised him even as he said it. Home. He had not thought of Normandy as home, had not thought of it as anything but a nightmare for 8 decades. But maybe that was wrong. Maybe home was not a place of comfort. Maybe home was the place where you became who you really are. The place where everything changed. The place where the boy from Wisconsin died, and something else was born in his place. Harold touched the names inside his cap one more time. I am coming, brothers, he whispered. After all these years, I'm finally coming. The sun set. The store closed. And somewhere across an ocean, in a cemetery overlooking a beach that had once run red with blood, 9,387 white crosses stood in perfect rows. Waiting. Normandy in June was nothing like Harold remembered. The beaches were peaceful now. Families walked along the sand where bodies had once floated. Children built castles where men had bled out, crying for their mothers. The water was blue and calm, not churned red with the blood of a generation. The journey had nearly killed him. 20 hours of travel, layovers and transfers, and the cramped confines of airplane seats that were not designed for 98-year-old bodies. Elena had stayed beside him the entire way, holding his hand through the turbulence, helping him to the restroom, making sure he took his medications on time. David Patterson had arranged everything, first-class tickets and wheelchair assistance, and a medical team on standby in France. But Harold barely noticed the luxury. His mind was 80 years away, trapped in the past that grew closer with every mile. They landed in Paris on June 5th, the anniversary eve. A convoy of vehicles waited to transport them to Normandy, provided by the French government, which had learned of Harold's story and extended every possible honor. Motorcycle escorts cleared the roads. Flags flew at half-staff in the villages they passed. Harold watched it all through the window of the car, his hands trembling against his thighs. This is too much, he murmured. I do not deserve this. Elena squeezed his hand. You deserve all of it, Mr. Harold. And more. The cemetery appeared on the horizon just as the sun began to set. Cala Village-Mer, the Normandy American Cemetery and Memorial. 172 acres of sacred ground overlooking Omaha Beach. 9,387 graves arranged in perfect arcs. White crosses and stars of David standing eternal guard over the boys who never came home. Harold asked the driver to stop at the entrance. He needed to walk the rest of the way, needed to feel the ground beneath his feet. They helped him out of the car. Westbrook was there, having flown over separately to coordinate with military officials. He handed Harold a cane, which Harold reluctantly accepted. His legs were weak from the journey, but his spine was straight. The gates of the cemetery stood open. Beyond them, the crosses stretched toward the horizon like an army frozen in formation. Harold took his first step onto the hallowed ground. The weight hit him immediately. 80 years of grief and guilt and memories he had tried to bury came crashing down like a wave. His knees buckled. Westbrook and Elena caught him, held him upright. "I cannot," Harold gasped. "I cannot do this." Elena's voice was gentle but firm. "Yes, you can, Mr. Harold. We are here. We are with you." Harold forced himself to breathe. In and out. The same rhythm that had carried him across the beach. The same rhythm that had carried him up the cliffs. He took another step, and another. The graves passed on either side of him. Each cross bore a name. Each name was a life cut short. Each life was a universe of possibility extinguished in a single terrible day. Harold did not need a map. He knew exactly where to go. The first stop was Plot F, Row 28, Grave 14. Ricardo Vasquez, Elena's great-grandfather. The man who had run in a gunfire to drag a wounded stranger to safety. The man who had died trying to save another. Elena fell to her knees before the cross. Her hands pressed against the cold, white marble. Her shoulders shook with sobs she could not control. Harold lowered himself beside her. Every joint screamed in protest, but he ignored the pain. "Hello, Ricardo," he said softly. "I brought your great-granddaughter to meet you. Her name is Elena. She has your eyes." He paused, touched the cross. "I should have come sooner. I should have told your family what you did. But I was a coward. I ran from this place, and I never looked back." His voice broke. "You were the bravest man I ever knew. You ran in a fire when everyone else was hiding. You saved lives that day. Patterson's life. Mine. Others I never even knew about." He wiped his eyes. "Your great-granddaughter is kind and brave and strong. You would be proud of her. She took care of me when no one else cared. She listened to my stories. She made me feel like I mattered." Elena looked up, tears streaming down her face. She reached out and took Harold's hand. "Thank you," she whispered to the grave. "Thank you for being brave. Thank you for giving me something to live up to." They stayed at Ricardo's grave for a long time. David Patterson joined them, knelt beside the cross, and spoke the words his father had never been able to say. "Thank you for saving him. Thank you for giving me a father." The sun sank lower. The shadows grew long. But Harold had one more visit to make. The walk to Plot D, Row 14, Grave 23 took everything he had left. His legs trembled. His heart pounded. His vision blurred with tears he could no longer contain. But he made it. Thomas Robert Riley, Private First Class, Pennsylvania, June 6, 1944. "Robbie." Harold collapsed before the grave. Not gracefully, not with dignity. He simply fell, his old body giving out, his knees hitting the grass that covered the remains of his best friend. 80 years. 80 years since he had watched Robbie fall. Since he had seen the bullet hit the helmet. Since he had kept running because stopping meant dying. "I am sorry," Harold sobbed. "I am so sorry, Robbie. I should have saved you. I should have done something." He pressed his forehead against the cool marble. "You were 18 years old. You were going to marry Betty. You were going to have a house with a porch. You were going to live." His shoulders shook. "And I left you there. I left you floating in that water, and I kept running, and I have never forgiven myself. Not for a single day." The words poured out of him. 80 years of grief. 80 years of guilt. 80 years of conversations he had never been able to have. "I carried you with me, Robbie. Every day. Every sunrise. I wrote your name inside my cap, so you would always be close. I told my wife about you. I told my children. I made sure you were never forgotten." He lifted his head, looked at the cross through blurred eyes. "I am 98 years old, brother. I do not have much time left, but I needed to tell you, before I go, that you mattered, that your life mattered, that your death was not meaningless." He touched the engraved name with trembling fingers. "You were the bravest person I ever knew, the kindest, the best, and I have spent every day since that beach trying to be worthy of the chance you gave me." The sun touched the horizon. The crosses glowed golden in the fading light. Harold's voice dropped to a whisper. "I will see you soon, Robbie. Save me a seat. We have a lot to catch up on." He stayed there as the sun set, as the stars emerged, as the eternal silence of the cemetery wrapped around him like a blanket. Elena and David and Westbrook stood at a respectful distance, bearing witness to a goodbye 80 years in the making. And somewhere in the sacred ground beneath that white cross, Harold felt certain Robbie was listening, smiling, finally at peace. The ceremony at Point du Hoc took place at dawn on June 6th, 80 years to the hour since the Rangers had begun their impossible climb. World leaders stood on the cliffs where boys had died. Cameras broadcast the moment to millions around the globe. But Harold barely noticed any of it. He stood at the edge of the cliff, looking down at the beach below. The water was calm. The sand was pristine. Seabirds circled overhead, calling to each other in the morning light. 80 years ago, this had been hell. A French general approached him with a small velvet box. On behalf of the Republic of France, he said formally, "We award you the Legion of Honor, our nation's highest distinction, for your extraordinary valor on these cliffs, for the lives you saved, for the freedom you helped secure." Harold accepted the medal with trembling hands. He did not know what to say. The weight of it felt wrong somehow, insufficient. No medal could capture what had happened here. No honor could bring back the dead. "Thank you," he managed, "but this belongs to all of them, the ones who did not come home." The general nodded solemnly. "We know, sir. We remember them all." The ceremony continued. Speeches were made. Prayers were offered. Taps echoed across the cliffs where so many had fallen. Harold stood through all of it, supported by Elena on one side and Westbrook on the other, his body failing, but his spirit somehow holding. When it was over, when the dignitaries had departed and the cameras had been packed away, Harold asked to be left alone on the cliff. Just for a moment. Just to say goodbye. Elena hesitated. "Are you sure, Mr. Harold?" He nodded. "I need to do this by myself, sweetheart. I will be all right." She squeezed his hand, then stepped back with the others. They retreated to a respectful distance, close enough to reach him if he fell, far enough to give him privacy. Harold stood at the edge of the cliff. The wind off the English Channel tugged at his cap. The same wind that had carried the screams of dying men 80 years ago. He closed his eyes. "I came back," he whispered. "After all these years, I finally came back." The faces of the dead rose before him. Robbie with his easy smile. Dutch with his Chicago accent. Jimmy the kid with the photograph of his baby sister. Big Mike with his terrible Irish songs. Ricardo, who ran into fire without hesitation. 65 names. 65 faces. 65 brothers who would never grow old. "I have lived 98 years, Harold said to them. "I have seen things you never got to see. I watched men walk on the moon. I held my children when they were born. I grew old with the woman I loved." His voice cracked. "And every single day, I wished you were there with me. Every sunrise, every milestone, every moment of joy, I carried you with me. You never left my heart. Not for one second." He opened his eyes, looked out at the horizon where the sun was climbing higher. "I do not know why I survived when you did not. There is no reason, no justice in it. It was just luck. Random, terrible luck." He touched the metal pinned to his chest. "But I have tried to live a life worthy of your sacrifice. I married a good woman. I raised good children. I worked hard. I helped when I could. And at the end, when I had nothing left, I became a greeter at a Walmart, and I made children smile." A small laugh escaped him. "You would have teased me for that, Robbie. A war hero handing out stickers. But you know what? Those smiles mattered. Every single one. Because that is what you died for. Not glory, not victory, just the ordinary miracle of people living their lives in peace." The wind shifted. For a moment, Harold could have sworn he heard voices on the breeze. Young voices, laughing, the way they had laughed on the transport ship before the ramp dropped and the world ended. He smiled. "I will see you all soon," he said softly. "Wait for me. I have so much to tell you." He turned away from the cliff, walked slowly back toward Elena and the others. Each step was agony, but he made it. He had made it this far. He would make it a little further. Elena took his arm. "Are you okay, Mr. Harold?" Harold looked at her, at this young woman who had become family, at Westbrook, who had become a friend, at David Patterson, who carried his father's gratitude like a sacred trust. "I am okay, sweetheart," he said. "For the first time in 80 years, I think I'm actually okay." They flew home the next day. The journey was long and exhausting, but Harold slept peacefully for the first time in decades. No nightmares, no screaming, just rest. 3 months later, Harold was back at his station in the Walmart entrance. The store had changed around him. There was a plaque now, near the front door, with his photograph and a brief description of his service. Customers who recognized him from the news stopped to shake his hand, to thank him, to hear a story if he was willing to share one. He was willing now. He had learned that sharing was not weakness. That memory was not burden. That the dead wanted to be spoken of, wanted their names to echo in the world they had died to protect. Ka was still there too. Changed. Humbled. He brought Harold coffee every morning now, asked about his health, listened when Harold wanted to talk. The man who had demanded Harold remove his cap now wore a small pin on his own lapel. A Ranger diamond, a reminder of the lesson he had learned. Elena worked beside Harold most mornings. She had framed her great-grandfather's grave marker photograph and hung it on her wall. She had started volunteering at the VA hospital on weekends, reading to veterans, listening to their stories, honoring the connection Harold had given her. And Harold? Harold still watched the sunrise every morning, still arrived 2 hours before his shift, still handed out stickers to children and said, "Welcome to Walmart," in his gentle voice. But something was different now. The weight was lighter. The guilt had faded. The ghosts were at peace. On a cool September morning, a young woman in army fatigues walked through the automatic doors. She stopped in front of Harold, stood at attention, and saluted. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "my name is Second Lieutenant Catherine Riley. I'm Thomas Riley's great-great-niece. I deploy to Germany next month. I wanted to meet you before I go." Harold stared at her. Robbie's family, Robbie's blood, standing before him in uniform, carrying on a legacy that had begun on a beach 80 years ago. His eyes filled with tears. "He looks just like you," Harold whispered. "Around the eyes. The same eyes." Catherine smiled. "That is what my grandmother always said." Harold reached out and took her hand, held it in both of his trembling palms. "Your great-great-uncle was the bravest man I ever knew," he said. "He was my best friend. He died so that I could live. And I have spent every day since trying to deserve that gift." He squeezed her hand. "You carry his name. Carry it with honor. And when you are afraid, when the world seems impossible, remember that a boy named Robbie Riley faced the impossible once. And he did not flinch." Catherine's eyes glistened. She nodded once. Then she leaned down and hugged him, this stranger who was not a stranger, this bridge between past and future. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore," she whispered, "for remembering him, for telling me." Harold held her tight. "Always," he said. "I will remember him always." She left to continue her shopping. Harold watched her go, watched Robbie's legacy walk into the future, and he smiled. He turned back to his station, picked up his stickers, straightened his cap. The automatic doors slid open. A mother entered with a small boy. The boy looked up at Harold with wide, curious eyes. Harold smiled at him, extended a sticker. "Welcome to Walmart, son. Have a wonderful day." The boy grinned, took the sticker, and ran to show his mother. Harold watched him go, felt the sun streaming through the windows, felt the names inside his cap pressing gently against his head. "Still here, brothers," he whispered, "still making a count." And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that heroes do not always wear capes or stand in spotlights, please subscribe to our channel. The next time you see an elderly veteran, do not just thank them for their service. Ask them their story. Listen, remember, because someday, sooner than we want to believe, they will be gone. And their stories will go with them unless we take the time to hear them. Thank you for watching. And remember, the greatest generation is still among us. All we have to do is look.